You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision making in your life and business.
You know, you always told me and my sisters growing up, Smiths don't quit.
Okay.
Right?
That's because that's what I was told. So I was just relaying what I had heard.
Well, you're acting like it's bad advice.
I'm not saying it's bad advice or good advice. I'm just saying that's the only thing I knew is that you just got to finish what you start.
I mean, that's pretty, it's a good lesson.
It's solid. Sure.
Okay. But to my knowledge, you've never quit anything. And I think that that's probably not accurate. You've probably quit something.
I'm sure I've quit several things.
Do you
I wanted to quit
anything?
this career. Like,
really?
Oh yeah. So I was a couple months in the career, right? And this was back in the day when they would walk around the office and they would give you the envelope, and in the envelope was your paycheck. It wasn't just deposited online like it is now. And so there was the lady who would go around and she'd give you your paycheck. So I opened up my envelope, and it's in the part where it's supposed to have dollar signs. It just had X's and said void, like because I had made no money over those 2 weeks. And so that was depressing. And then I get a call from a client who was going to implement a larger policy that would have been very lucrative to me, and they had decided not to do that. So on top of this, so it's kind of a double whammy. And I remember standing at the elevator bank on the 11th floor of this building, looking out over the windows and looking sort of down at the city below, thinking, I'll just get on this elevator. I'll go down to the first floor. I'll get my car and I'll just go away from this. This is maybe not for me. But I was able to kind of reflect on it and say that, I think I'm having a bad day. Right. And I had gotten advice from a manager before this event. And he said, and I thought this was smart. He said, in this career, you're going to have ups and downs, right? As with anything difficult, you're going to have good days and bad days, good months, bad months.
Even with anything easy, really.
Yeah. And he said, there will be times on the down tick that you will want to leave. You'll want to quit. He said, never do that. He goes, wait till you're having a great day, a great week, a great month. It's your best month ever. He goes, then if you want to quit, you're doing it for all the right reasons. It's not alignment. It's not giving you fulfillment, but look for those ebbs and flows and seek those times to evaluate where it's not going to be emotion driven.
I just had that conversation with a client who lives in Colorado, and she had been talking to me for a while about, I think I want to sell my business. And a big inflow for them is the tourism season, and we just had July 4th. Yeah. So even more so. And I talked to her yesterday, and she was like, yeah, I definitely want to quit. And I said, well, this is great news because that you mean it.
Right. This was after a big weekend.
Yes. Like if you told me this in February, I would say, let's wait a while. You're telling me now. Good.
Do you have a fireworks stand? Is that the business?
Nah, liquor store. But close enough. Yeah. It's funny. You talk about quitting the industry. The amount of guys that I've met casually, oh, what do you do? Where are you from? What do you do for work? And they go, oh, I used to do that too. And then I ask when they stopped. The amount of them that say 2008, it's half of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do that. I did that for about 15 years.
Got out in 2008.
I'm like,
that would be the time to get in. Like,
right?
You're going to look like a hero from that point forward.
You can't mess it up any worse than the last guy, But speaking of not quitting and being resilient, our guest today, Dr. M.H. Pelletier, is a practicing work psychologist and trusted senior leader in clinical counseling and workplace psychology. She is the author of The Resilience Plan. We talked to her about resilience. What does it take to build it? How is it helpful in eliminating bad decisions in your life and in your business? We covered a lot of topics, the psychological components of resilience, the practical components of resilience. If you can, I'll ask that you stick through this episode.
Don't quit.
Don't quit. And you might learn something. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. MH, you're the expert in resilience, but we're going to test your resilience by making you talk to Sean for an hour.
Okay, I'm prepared.
That will require a lot of resilience, I'm sure. So you've got your MBA and PhD in psychology. How did you move into getting interested in resilience?
Yes, it's people I was working with and talking to. Because of that combination, in any role I was in, so at the time, earlier in my career, when I had just combined these two pieces, I ended up working a lot with professionals and leaders. So even if I was, say, in a senior leadership role in the organization, when someone needed something from one of the more senior people kind of thing, I ended up with these people. And they were high achievers, building businesses, all these things. And very used to being the strong one, being the rock, being resourceful, high performing, making things happen. Speaking to them about challenges was not going to resonate with anything. Resilience was going to resonate. It was active, proactive, even nourishing something that you have control over, that resonated for them. So that's and of course there was all the research that backed it up. That makes sense. But together, that's how that focus happened.
So there's a lot of different ways I can be resilient. How helpful is it to endure verbal abuse from loved ones? Am I building character, or are we straining a relationship?
Oh, you're going straight to it, are you? Well, no. Well, no. For most people, voluntarily putting ourselves in a challenging, unhealthy situation is probably not the best way to do that. But I would say if we're thinking in particularly, well, as it connects to our work context and it does to our personal context as well, resilience is about going through adversity, coming out even stronger, right? So it could be an acute moment, like, yes, someone being challenging in their communication, but it could also be chronic, which, in fact, if it's your father, yes, it may be chronic. I don't know. But the point is, you're going through challenging situations and you're coming out even stronger. You're growing from it. You're learning. And so, to your point in terms of do you select those that are mostly challenging? The reality is that given everything that you already want to have in your life and have in your life, you likely already have challenging situations. So you probably don't need to look for them. What instead you may want to do is look for what is there, what is challenging, and manage these pieces. And through this, sometimes it may mean persisting, enduring, to use the same word, but sometimes it may mean getting out of there and saying no.
So how did you figure this out for yourself? What were the things that were challenging for you that you overcame and then realized, oh, wait, there's something here?
Yes, happens all the time. Smaller ways, larger ways. One of the recent ones for me was launching this book in February. And in the 6 months and more prior to the launch, seeing that this event was coming, that was probably going to be fairly demanding, that I was also thinking, but how demanding can that be? Really, the book is written, it's coming out, But one of the ways that I've learned through other situations too is to connect with others, listen to what they're saying, not just go with what I think is going to look like. And even if I'm thinking, well, they're exaggerating, people were telling me, careful with the month prior, the month during, the month after. And I was thinking, really? How complicated can this be? I listened, and it was a really good idea. So that's a recent example for me of seeing that something more demanding was coming. And one of the strategies in this particular case, that's not the only one, but was to listen, to outreach, connect, listen, get data in some ways, almost like a scientific experiment that you allow yourself to test for yourself, and worked well.
So I want to back up a little bit and look at how you're defining the term resilience as opposed to grit or being anti-fragile, or, you know, how is this different from those types of attributes?
Yes. I think that the way I'm characterizing it that makes it even more different is that I'm really focused on strategic resilience. And so what that means is, and you're right, a lot of the time in conversations, we will equate resilience with grit, persistence at all cost, keeping going no matter what, that kind of thing. If we're being strategic about our resilience, at times it may mean this, and at times it may mean I'm not continuing with this. So much like in a business, right? When we're being strategic about a new product or an existing product or service, there will be times where, despite the challenges, we will carry on, we'll keep going, we'll tweak, we'll change it, but we'll keep going. And there are times when we will say, time to take a bath, get out of that part of the business. Right? So same idea here. If we want to be successful, we need to be strategic. And if we want to be strategic and successful, we want to really be planful, deliberate about how we nourish our resilience.
So how does the strategic plan allow you to differentiate between times when I should be resilient, I should press through, I should seek completion of this task, versus those where the appropriate course of action is to bail out or to stop doing what I'm doing?
Yes. It will be similar to, and I'm going to use that analogy because truly that's how this particular approach came from. So in a business, part of how you will get to that decision is usually connected to where are we going as a business, right? What are our core values? What is our vision for our organization? What's going on in the market? A number of these pieces. So same thing here. We're, say, going on with a number of projects that we have. If we're stepping back and looking to be strategic about our resilience, what that means is we will reflect back on what are my values, professional and personal. What's going on in my context, the kind of demands and supply I'm facing, perhaps doing even the equivalent of a SWOT analysis on yourself, looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenging threats from the environment. And as you look at all this, it may inform what you may want to do next. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone is going for a professional certification, for example, or a launch of a next product, and it's starting to be so challenging, so difficult. They're not sure they're going to make it. If we do step back and realize that, my values are somewhere else. I've been doing this because it looked like the next logical thing to do, but that doesn't connect with my value. And if I'm looking at my current context, since the time I made that decision, a new set of demands have come up in my personal or professional life, new opportunities, new things, whatever, positive, not so positive, doesn't matter. The context has changed. So I may find myself in a moment to decide, I'm going to get out of this.
So there's moments that come into our life that make us kind of rethink and re-examine. Usually that's a bad moment. It's something where we're feeling burnt out, tired, sick of it. Other than just kind of hitting a wall, is there any other way that I can kind of create that understanding for myself that I'm in the wrong spot.
Yes. And you're going straight into becoming self-aware. Yeah, it's something we talk about in emotional intelligence. We may have heard it in that moment. But really what we're doing is increasing your clarity. So often it first starts with this moment of discomfort. You're having this feeling that something's not right. I can't, either I'm freezing or really worried or whatever it is. But you know something's not good. Okay. And what we'll want is not make a decision in that moment out of stress, pressures, all these other things, and step back, create a bit of space so you can actually understand how are you feeling, what's going on there, and possibly how others around are feeling, and being compassionate everywhere so that you can understand where yourself and others around you are coming from. Once you've taken a bit of that step, already you start having more clarity. Better place to operate from already. And that's where you may be able to look at, okay, if I were to think about this situation using a bit of a scientific mind, testing my hypothesis, how would I go about this? Right? So, or maybe you'd be connecting with other people around you, connecting with a colleague you trust, connecting with your executive coach, with your spiritual leader, anyone that you trust, that you can start having this conversation to help you create space in your own head, creating that clarity that then will allow you to take your next step.
So you shared an example in your book about, and I love hiking examples, and it's a hiking example. So I wanted to hear you tell that story, that I had some questions for you about it.
Yes, well, and I've had others too. But the one I'm talking about in the book, it's that story where, so I've been doing a lot of hiking, mountaineering, short hikes, long treks, multi-day treks, all these things. But that particular situation, what happened is I had gone with my husband, Nick, on an 8-day traverse in the Canadian Rockies. So you go in somewhere and you walk 8 days and you come out at the other end. And to make a long story short, early in the hike, we had crossed a particular river. And before crossing it, it was day one. We were, fresh and really feeling confident and strong in the whole thing. And we had used all the tools, all the steps, all the strategies that we usually use to cross it safely, and we did. But later down in that trek, we had to realize that we actually had to turn around instead of pursuing the trek as planned. So we came back, and we ended up having to recross that river, therefore, 8 days later. And this overall thing was happening at the beginning of a summer that had received a lot of snow. So we got to that same river, but the river was actually much higher than the first time because of melting snow. And Nick crossed it. We looked at each other to talk. We could not even hear each other. That's how loud and tumultuous it was. And so he offered to come and get me. I said, no, one of us has crossed it. Stay there. I will come to you. And I'm gesturing because he couldn't hear me. And then I went in the river. And the second I stepped into it, the current grabbed both of my legs, pulled me off my feet immediately. I'm going down head first in the river, feeling the water. And really, it doesn't matter at that time how experienced or confident or resilient you think you are. Had zero control there. But then the next thing that happened is I felt that force grabbing me by the backpack and throwing me on the second side of the river. And that was Nick, who had been able to get in the river, see me grab me and throw me out there. So saved me, literally. And so that's what happened there. But the key piece to this was how after, through all the learnings, hiking specific learnings, but also bigger life learnings, right? How on day one, it's similar to all of us in our professional lives at times. On day one, when things are mostly fine, we're pretty good. We deal with things, we're going through tough times, and we are solid. But where we get caught is usually in this equivalent of day 8, where so much more is going on. In that case, we were tired from those 8 days, and we have so many demands, and things are different from expected. And that's when we're most at risk. And that was that river analogy.
Yeah, and there's things that you can't prepare for. You can't plan for every single contingency or every single thing that could go wrong. So a resiliency as a skill is broadly going to help you avoid a lot of these catastrophic events, right? You know, we do a fire drill and a hurricane drill and an active shooter drill. You can't drill everything. You can't drill slipping and falling into the river and every other thing that could go wrong. So resiliency, if you focus on resiliency, well, then you're good on everything that could go wrong.
You're better. Yes.
Yeah, better. Yeah, it's not alone going to solve it. Some people will say, well, I'm a resilient person and you know, these other people, whether it's an employee, a friend, family, whoever, they're just not resilient. They just don't have it. You either have it or you don't. What do you say to someone who thinks that this is a trait that you either have or you don't have?
Yeah, it's something that many people think. And the reality is, so we know from research, it is not a personality trait. Okay, it's a state. Okay, so number one, which means good news is we therefore have control over it and we can build it.
What is the research? How did the research conclude that?
Yes, it's research on, what is a stable thing that does not change over time, like a personality trait, versus things that will change. Now, one of the interesting pieces we have from research that connects these two is how when we're studying personality, there's many, many ways of doing this, but one of the very frequently used model is the sort of a 5 main personality trait model that translates in very complex models. But one of these traits there is optimism. And we know from research that individuals who tend to be a bit more optimistic tend to have higher levels of resilience. But that's it. Even then, let's say you're a highly optimistic person, which many entrepreneurs are, absolutely, business owners. You have to be, otherwise you're never going to do all the things you do. So, but even then, your resilience will actually fluctuate over time, right? So you want to know
how quickly can it go away?
Oh, complex equation. It depends on many things. Some of the things it depends on is what was your baseline, right? So if your baseline, you think of it,
Are there ways, I mean, I'm sure there's not like a 10-point scale for resiliency.
That's what I was going to ask.
There's got to be, how
are you measuring resilience?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it will depend on context, and it is truly, and I don't have an exact, a number, like you said. It's your ability to go through adversity, come out even stronger. So what that means is the demands are coming at me, and I can protect my levels of energy, manage them, and still have energy to deal with the next thing, learn from this one potentially, and move on. So sometimes a way to try to figure out where are you at right now? Is your resilience great right now or not? And how is it compared to yesterday, for example, right? And everyone's life is so full, so busy that it's not like you have a session with a registered psychologist or an executive coach every day to help you have that 360 perspective. More and more people are using these sessions to understand themselves.
Yeah.
But one of the easy ways is, because we want that self-awareness as much as we can, which we do want on a daily basis as much as we can. So on a daily basis, you can ask yourself, just looking at your actual level of energy, 0 to 10, 10 highest, 0, you're not getting out of bed. Where do you find you were mostly, say, today? And you just say, put that number on a little calendar you have that you look at every night, for example. And that will be internally valid because it's you rating it every single day. But it allows you to see it faster.
Are there external validations that are reliable, or external forms of measurement that are reliable? Is it like, I don't know, get a bunch of people together, have them do different things, and then who can hold their hand in a bucket of ice the longest?
Are you saying other than just a self-evaluation?
Other than self-evaluation, because I imagine that's helpful to build my own resiliency relative to my prior self. But who's more resilient between Sean and I? That's difficult to measure. He may be more resilient at walking a long distance because he practices the skill of walking, I may be more resilient at,
It's going to be hard to come up with an example.
You shouldn't have paused. Yeah. In theory, I could be more resilient at something, right?
Yes.
So in the example you're giving, it's almost, I could see how you're using the word resilience there. But here it almost sounds like it's more skilled at. Because if resilience is a psychological skill, it's whether I'm good at running or not, sticking my hand in a bucket of water or not, using completely different things. So I may not have trained myself to do any of these things, let's say, and I may then be asked to run for a long distance. And if I am resilient about it, I will take my values into account. So let's say I happen to be a runner. I value running. I love it. I will take my context into account. I have a knee injury, mild cartilage situation. Bad idea for me to go for a run. I will take my context into account. I love you both, and I'd love to do these challenges with you. So maybe instead, my resilient response will be, great idea. Love the idea of running, but not so great for me. Let's find something else that may work better. That's my resilient response. We think it was not a response of winning or making it longer than you. Yeah.
So I think what I'm getting from your answer, MH, is that it may be not only impractical but unhelpful to measure objective resilience as compared to others. But if I'm measuring it in comparison with myself, then I can focus on improving it in a healthy way. Is that fair?
Yes. The one piece that I could see some useful way to think of it this way. If we connect it with, say, the team resilience, which is a context where we're now a few people together, we're trying to go through adversity together. And so it may be interesting to see how it will show up here, right? As a team, how are we doing together? And in a team, you'll be looking at, yes, individual levels of resilience, that helps, but individuals who are in general more resilient will not necessarily make a resilient team. And in a resilient team, you'll be looking at creating a context where for us as a team, we will go through adversity, come out even stronger. For example, creating what we call psychological safety, a context where we can make mistakes, we can make errors, we can fail, talk about it, learn from it, and keep going. So it's a different angle to your question, but this overall context where we can work together to also.
So a lot of this, I see a lot of overlap here between resilience and, let's say, determination. And a lot of that would hinge on my ability to optimize the conservation of energy that I have, right? Either individually or on a team. So how do I make sure that I'm preserving and optimizing the utilization of energy through a task? Because it seems like resilience is task specific, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
Task or context specific
right.
as well. So how are you maintaining it? It depends on the task and the context, obviously, but it requires diving a bit actually into, what are your values as you're approaching this task or context? What are your natural strengths that you're bringing to it, the challenges that are there, and the overall context?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that both of us have done that have been task specific. So Sanger has competed in a few triathlons, which is sort of the ultimate test of resilience and determination and energy depletion, really, just kind of making it through that. Do you feel like you had, was resilience a term that you would
I don't know
apply?
if it's the ultimate test, but it was the only thing I was testing.
Okay. Well, there you go.
I wasn't really concerned with how fast I ran. I was concerned with just not stopping.
Yeah.
It was purely an exercise in resilience for me. It wasn't.
Well, isn't that resilience though? I mean, just sort of not stopping.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, there are harder things that would have required more resilience that I could have done, but I wasn't getting anything out of it other than a test of my resilience. There's other things that I enjoy that require resilience, but I also like other things that they provide, like hiking. Well, the view at the end is a big reward.
Right.
Well, there's no view when you're swimming 2.4 miles in the muddy Brazos River.
Right. But I think, there are times when we have, let's say, hiked a 14er in Colorado, and you're certainly going through energy depletion, and you've got to have not only a conservation of energy and a strategy to use it effectively to get to the summit, but then back down and all the way back down, right? Because there is no other option. You can't turn around and bail on the way back.
Yeah.
You've got to finish.
That's something that new hikers never really understand until they go.
You can't quit 90%.
Yeah. You once you get to the top, that's like you can't quit early.
There's no way to shortcut it.
No, you're going all the way back down.
Yeah.
And that's always, the new hiker will put it in his head that once I get to the top of this mountain, I'm done.
I had a situation one time where I thought I was conserving energy and taking a shortcut.
There's never a good idea.
Oh, it's never a good idea.
It's always worse.
But I looked at the satellite view of this trail and it kind of made this big U. It kind of went out way to the right and then back. And I'm like, I could shortcut this thing. And I looked at the satellite and I didn't see any reason why I couldn't just cut the,
Well, what's interesting is that is such a good lesson that I think aligns with what MH is saying, because what I'm hearing you say, MH, is that it's not purely a psychological skill, is that the decisions that we make can improve our likelihood to be resilient. And if you, for example, resilience is not the only thing that's going to get me up to the mountaintop and back down. It's staying on the trail. I have a decision to try to shortcut it on the mountain and in life. And if I go shortcut it, a lot of times, every time I've ever seen it done on the mountain and in life, it's a harder road. It's a harder road. And so it's not just the resilience that got me to the mountaintop. It's that I was disciplined enough to say, I'm going to go the longer route as opposed to the shorter route, because this is the path that you're supposed to go.
Right.
It goes this way goes this way for a reason. I'm going to trust that the guys who built this trail knew what they were doing. I'm going to not have to crawl through loose rock on my hands and knees and take twice as long.
That's right. Well, and it really involves all aspects of us as humans. There is, yes, the emotions. There is the cognitive aspect, how you're thinking about it. There is the behavioral side of things. So even when you were doing, say, triathlon, just for you to go through it, that was your objective. Through this, it impacted your sense of self-efficacy. I can do things that are that hard, plan for it, train for them that long, be in it, be in pain, carry on because I know I have the training, and remind myself that I can do this. And it probably connected all of these aspects of your experience. And so usually if we're, say in the work-specific context, looking to optimize our resilience, there is this baseline of knowledge and experience that are sort of there, and we're assuming that they are there, and we're looking at the psychological aspect of it a bit more. But there is also the very practical aspect. Let's say I am starting a new business in a completely or fairly different area. Part of my resilience plan may actually involve a strategic pillar that is to surround myself with individuals who are deep experts in this area, to make sure I'm not just going with what I think is really cool and building my, my plan with other aspects. No. If this is the context, it will be part of the plan.
Yeah. And I think it's important to use the language that you use, because I hear a lot of people say like, okay, well, how can we make this easier? And easier is not necessarily the word that they mean. What they mean is like, how can we make our objective, our team, me as an individual, how can we make this more resilient of a plan? And they say easier. And what that tends to lend itself to is short-term comfort, which is where you end up making the wrong decision. Like, oh, well, how can I make this easier? I'll go take the shortcut route, or I'll go climb the smaller mountain, or I just won't train as much this week. Well, you do that.
That never works.
That doesn't work. I don't train as much this week. This week was easier, but in the context of my objective on race day, I'm going to be hurting more. I take the perceived shortcut, the bird's eye view shorter way. I'm going to end up going through a swamp instead of a dry trail that's 2 miles longer. Whatever it is, same thing in business. Well, how can I make it easier? Well, you could not market as much. There you go. Now you're not spending that time and money.
You don't have to work with as many clients.
Life's going to get harder in about 6 months.
That's right. And being more strategic also will be sometimes we'll get that sense of being easier because you're being strategic. So that, let's say you're in that trail, it looks like there is a shortcut, and now you pause for a second. All right, I can go in the tried and true trail, which I know exactly how much energy I need. I know how much food and water I have and what time of day it is. My level of confidence in reaching my summit, say in 7 hours, is fairly high. This shortcut looks fantastic. There could be a swamp or whatever else in between, and that's a risk. So then it becomes a decision. Am I okay with potentially not summiting this thing? I'm actually more curious about experimenting with that shortcut because I want to know how it looks like. Maybe it will allow me to come back another day and summit this thing in 4 instead of 7 hours. And I'm willing to just lose out today, not win this race, not even be disqualified, whatever. So it depends, but it's that stepping back in that moment of decision to look at the overall context and then deciding from there.
Is it worthwhile to seek out ways to add stress in a way that would be positive so that it builds resilience in a team?
You know, from what I'm seeing, I love where you're coming from. It's a bit of almost like that gradual exposure in some ways, right? You just build it the same way you build physical strength to do, a physical challenge. I would say, from my experience, the challenges are there. What you want possibly instead is to call them out more, surface them. Let's bring them out more so that we know where the challenges are and put a microscope on it. I have not seen yet. Now, maybe you'll have an example that will make me see it differently. People I've worked with were not in situations where there wasn't a sufficient amount of challenge. They had more challenges that they could handle, including some that were under the table, not discussed, not tackled. Do you have something in particular in mind?
I'm looking at when, for example, Elon Musk, when he's designing something or engineering something, will famously sort of take an approach of reducing steps down to a point where he has had to then add some back in and feeling like, okay, if I didn't have to add back in, I didn't take away enough. So that's a way to sort of stress a manufacturing process or engineering process. And so I'm wondering if that ought to be a way that you go about in business to intentionally sort of stress the systems to create resilience to push through.
I think what you would... So things come to mind. One is, have you identified as many risks as you could? And sometimes that's maybe missing some risks that were not identified. And if you do identify them, then in some ways you are creating these additional tasks and demands and that the team can look into. So that would be one. The other, maybe, have I optimized the contributions that everyone on the team can bring? Do I have people who are fantastic on the team, doing excellent work, and actually have way more potential than this? Have we tapped into all the things they could bring us? Is this work even challenging for them? And that could be another approach to, in some ways, add the demands, but in a way that leads somewhere practical and useful and is engaging from a people perspective. But in terms of creating additional demands, so far I've not seen an example where in the human side of things that would be
right.
I think like if you're interpreting that to mean busy work, then that seems like an obvious no. If you're doing something unproductive for the sake of having another challenge, then that would be
no.
I know you're not.
No.
So, but challenges and the benefit to our mentality and our spirituality in a positive way seem really obvious to me. Like, why is fasting such an emphasis in every religion? Hey, you want to get closer to God? Fast. Well, it's because it's hard. It's not because it's easy. There's zero religious texts that say if you want to get closer to God, put more sugar in your coffee. But
if there was, that would be the leading religion.
We'd be praying to St. Mary and Starbucks.
Yeah.
But doing the things that are hard are improving our ability to do other things that are hard. And I read a study a few months ago about the growth in the part of our brains when we do things that are hard that we don't want to do. And the key element in whether something was quote unquote hard was really whether or not I wanted to do it in the first place. So the area of the brain was the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, I think, and I'm sure you would correct me. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex, it grows when we do things that we don't want to do. Now, if we do things that are hard, quote unquote, that we like doing, it doesn't really make a difference. So you could have two people doing the same activities and one receives the growth and the other one doesn't. But the difference is, running, let's say. Well, this guy loves running. He can't wait to run every day. He's not going to have any anterior mid-cingulate cortex growth. The other guy hates running. He goes out and runs. Now, they're both conceivably having the same physical benefit. They're having the same benefit on their heart rate and their muscle density and their bone density, all these things. This guy is getting the brain benefit of having conquered something that he didn't want to do. And what they found was that translates to other things that you don't want to do, all the way to the will to live. So patients who were diagnosed with cancer, who had larger anterior mid-cingulate cortexes, were more likely to survive cancer than those who had really low growth in this area of the brain. And I think that's why you see the popularity of, cold plunges, for example, is there's benefits
saunas too.
To the saunas. There's benefits to the body in doing both of those things. But then there's also this benefit to the mind of, I do this hard thing. It's easier for me to do these other things that maybe are not even physical. Hey, I got to write this paper for school. I don't want to do it, but I do things that I don't want to do anyway. I do the dang cold plunge every morning. So it seems clear to me that there's a benefit there. When I take it a step further, where Sean's saying is, hey, how can I implement that in a structural way in my team or systematic way in my business? Logically, I see the connection, but in practice, I don't have any evidence that necessarily works.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, so there is almost like naturally occurring in most workplaces, things that we want to be doing and things we don't really want to be doing, but we have to be doing. And so I think that's probably most of what I've seen and possibly what you've seen as well in a work context. They will tend to coexist. They're there. And what we would want for sure is to support both happening. Now, back to the other part of this, what you were saying in terms of, so doing hard things. The research on resilience would not say do any hard thing and that will increase your resilience. It may or may not be true, but I have not seen that particular piece of research. On resilience, what we do know that is established by body of research is that there are daily and weekly actions that will tend to increase our resilience in any context. So again, now we're crossing different areas, not just a specific task or activity. And you know what these are. The main problem is not knowing, it's more doing, and hence the idea of being strategic about how do you get to implement these things. But we are talking, yes, about things like in the physical activity side of things, cardio training, strength training, meditative type activity. On the nutrition side, improving your nutrition, most researched is the Mediterranean diet, improving your sleep, improving the quantity of time you're spending with people you enjoy spending time with, so your relationships. And there are others, time in nature, volunteer work, and various other things. Investing in your spirituality, if that's something that's important for you in life. And so, see, even if all we did is focus on, say, the top 4 that I was mentioning, the exercise, sleep, nutrition, relationship, likely, even within these 4, there will be things you don't really feel like doing all the time, except if you're training for triathlon and actually wanting to do the exercise. But many people, it will be actually something that they will have to really make themselves do.
I mean, I never wanted to do it.
No, I mean, I like what you're saying, because I think there's a lot of truth in saying if I press myself to do something I don't want to do, something difficult, that I gain confidence, I gain an exposure that was no longer the hardest thing I've ever done. Now I can tackle something else, and I gain confidence and strength of mind and body and so forth. I think there's a lot of benefits.
There is. It connects with research on self-efficacy, that belief that you can do this thing, which we know if you build this, it increases your self-efficacy about this in the future or even other things. And so overall, it all connects. Absolutely.
How do I prevent from getting to a point of burnout, or in your example, maybe, overtraining in the workplace? I mean, I want to be resilient. I want to have my team do as much as they can. How do I identify and prevent sort of crossing that line where it turns into burnout?
You can mitigate it. You cannot be 100% sure to prevent it. And here's the reason why. Burnout is really in the relationship between us as individuals and our workplace. It's here in the middle. And so it is a shared responsibility. I have some as an individual, and my workplace has some as a workplace. And that's very important because a few years ago, most people thought that burnout was individual and a weakness. It's not. It's part of a system where there is individual and the workplace. Very important. So all this to say, in the end, it will be hitting the individual, us. So we do want to watch for particular signs. And burnout is, it's not a diagnosis. It's an occupational phenomenon as defined by the World Health Organization. 3 main characteristics. It has exhaustion, which we all equate it with, but also cynicism. So we've lost hope that anything's going to change, and it's impacting our performance. But here's the thing. Burnout does not show up suddenly. It builds over time. The problem, and we will see signs, and I'll tell you what they look like, we disregard these signs. So before getting over here completely exhausted, we're overextended, but we disregard that. Before getting cynical, we get less engaged, not feel the love as much. We disregard that too. And before we have significant problems in performance, making bad decisions, sending the wrong proposal to the wrong client, we've had more things fall through the cracks. And then into even more detailed signs, your concentration's not as good, you're more impatient, your sleep's not out the window, things like this that we will again disregard because we're pushing through. Yet, if we listened to these signs, we could take a different course of action. It's not going to make things worse. It just allows us to have more clarity. Again, a bit of that concept of stepping back to check in and then taking actions to change the course of where this is going.
So how do you recognize when you're in these moments of burnout, early stage before you get to the end? I mean, you're pointing out signs, but it seems like, those signs are much more visible after the fact than they are during the moment.
Yes. And this is a great, lovely, perfect question, because ideally, I often say we want to catch these signs on a 2 out of 10 scale, right? Not 9.5 when it's getting very challenging, early. And the way we will catch them early it brings us back to checking in with ourselves, being fairly self-aware, and seeing for ourselves how we're doing. And it's very personal. So let's say you're used to looking at financial statements, and you scan through quickly, you know where the things are, you're moving on to the next thing, it's fine. And now you see yourself glaring at the financial statement, and you turn the page, but you realize what you just looked at did not actually sink in. You're flipping back. That's a sign for you that it is not my usual self, and you'll want to pay attention to this. It's you knowing your own signs. And truly, that's important because, sometimes one of the signs, for example, may be how you're going about decision making. If usually you're that person that makes decisions fast, and now you're finding yourself slowing right down more than usual, not just a nice distance, like way down, that may be a sign. Or if usually you're the person that takes time before making decisions, that's your style, and then you find yourself, don't care, going fast, making decisions, that may be a sign as well. So you see how individual this is, right? It's you knowing yourself and catching that difference. Yes, ideally at a 2 out of 10.
And I imagine that applies to being a supportive teammate or a supportive spouse. When we see that behavior change in others, might be easier for us to recognize it than for them. How do we support those other people in our life other than, hey, take the day off, man? That seems to be the kind of the go-to answer that I hear a lot is, oh, I took a mental health day. And I always wonder, was that even the right decision for you? Was running away from responsibility actually the healthiest thing you could have done? Or was, there some other way to kind of lean into the problem to solve it?
Yes.
So that's what I see a lot is that, taking a day off seems to be the only thing that people bring up as a solution, but there's got to be something else.
There are different things. Sometimes the distance can allow, but it's also what you do during that day off, right? If all you do is distance yourself, distract yourself doing something else, not taking a step back, a reflective step back, not connecting with resources, not doing something that might change the course of action, then it's just a day off.
Yeah, it might create more stress if you're coming back to a day behind on work.
Yeah.
That too. So, and it is extremely important in our communities, personal communities, like a family or group of friends, and work communities now we're on the professional side, to create, cultures where we support each other. And the challenge, when a challenge or an important piece of this picture is to keep in mind that even when someone is not looking like their usual self, let's say changing their way of making decisions or being more impatient than they used to be or things like this, it could be something going on the psychological side, their resilience going down. It could be something going on physically. It could be something going on with their parents. I mean, for all we know, right? We don't know. But even if we don't know, and we may or may not actually find out, some of that may be personal to them, and we will not know. What we can still do is bring our observation to this person. So saying, Sean, usually when we connect to each other, you're turning your camera on, you're talking, you're asking questions. And in the past few times we connected, you don't talk much, you just stay audio. Are you okay? You want us to chat? And then if Sean says, no, I'm fine, MH, then I can still say, you know what, if it changes, let me know. Happy to chat.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get trouble with resilience when there's that energy depletion, which happens when we're operating in areas outside of our natural instincts. All right. I can do things as part of my role and my job that I instinctually do. Right. And I love doing those things, and I actually finish those tasks with more energy than I started, and sometimes. But there are some things that I have to do that are necessary, let's say, but will deplete energy. And what I find is that if I have to spend a day, or if there's a day where I'm spending times on things that aren't my natural instinct, aren't my natural strength, I will finish that day depleted. And so if I'm looking at catching burnout in team members, I might want to assess, are they operating within a flow state, for example? Are they operating in a state that is in their natural instincts? Or am I giving them things that they're having to really work to accomplish?
Yes, that could be that. And sometimes, also connecting to what we were saying earlier, there will be tasks we just need to do, don't like, and are extremely draining. Sometimes they're predictable, sometimes they're not, right? If in certain types of products or services, call centers, for example, right? You'll get at times calls that are just extremely demanding and all this. So how can we strategically, for our team resilience, plan ahead for these moments, for these dates? Can we, instead of putting all these much more draining activities all in one day, can we potentially spread them over a period of time, making sure that there are other nourishing energies happening that day? If it's not possible to do it that way, okay, can we make the day shorter? Can we make sure that the following day will be a very normal day to balance things out? What can we do? And it depends so much, right? Depending on what the industry, what the company is doing. But what can we do proactively to plan for this?
What would you say is your final decision-making tip for business owners?
I would say is to build now your reflective self, your reflective leadership way. What's going to allow you to step back and not operate from making a decision out of stress, pressure, all these less optimal places. And, well, I would argue that having a strategic plan will help you do that, but it depends from person to person. Is this a key person, a peer you're connecting with? Is it your dad? Is it your son? Right? What step can you insert to make sure you're stepping back, to have that reflective moment to then allow you to make the most optimal decision?
Thank you, MH. Where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Well, the theresilienceplan.com will lead you to the book and to all my work. Otherwise, of course, LinkedIn, always happy to connect with people there. And that's a way, right, to add your own voice to the conversation as well. Always happy to hear from people.
Marie-Hélène Pelletier, thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
My takeaway from talking with MH, when you look at resilience, it's interesting that we a lot of times we will compartmentalize resilience in our work life or in our personal life, but they're really intertwined, and I think they affect both parts. And that so often we don't spend enough time reflecting on what is my supply of energy and what do I draw from to help push through and gain resilience, whether it's teammates or a plan or training or whatever it is, and look ahead to see what demands are going to be asked of me. We just sort of put our head down, put our nose to the grindstone, keep going. That's what we're always told. And I think we can approach it more thoughtfully to be more resilient and get the results that we want.
My big takeaway is that resilience is not only a psychological skill, it's making the decisions that put you in the best position to live out that psychological skill. To MH's point, if I'm a runner and you're not a runner, then racing me is not a good way you're not setting yourself up to be resilient because you don't run.
Yeah.
So it's not all about the psychological skill of building resilience. It's about making decisions to be efficient with our time and resources.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram @decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.